Welcome to Masters of Regeneration Radio. Conversations with humans who dare to reimagine our place on planet Earth. Earth is changing fast. Evolution happening in real time. An intimate, circular understanding of nature and living systems. We are the land. The land is us. Three, two, one. Welcome everyone to episode 16 of Masters of Regeneration Radio. I'm really excited today because Dan Giusti is here. Dan is the founder of a project called Brigade. Dan was also the head chef at Noma for 3 years. If you haven't heard of Noma, Noma is the iconic restaurant in Denmark that was part of the Nordic movement, of the reinvention of all that movement, reconnecting to the landscape and looking at local terroirs and seeing what was available as opposed to trying to imitate other cuisines and all that. It's part of the movement that in the last 15 years has sort of reconnected to the land. So that's beautiful. Dan was head chef at Noma for 3 years, and then he wanted to expand his reach and bring all that expertise to tackle a pretty gigantic challenge in the US, school food. So today we're going to be talking about all the details, all the challenges, all the limitations, all the constraints of trying to make good food in the public school system. And we'll see what good food means as well. So enjoy the show, guys, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Before we get started, a quick reminder, please, if you like our show, go to iTunes, give us 5 stars, leave a review, and share it with your friends. Pick 5 people, 10 people, and share the show with them. Ask them to do the same if they like the content. It helps us a lot. Follow us on Instagram.com at Masters of Regeneration. And also please go to our website, mastersofregeneration.com, and sign up for our mailing list if you like. We have awesome stuff available on the website and a bunch of exciting new things coming from February 2019. Having said that, I wish you all a very, very warm and aware holiday season. Take care, and I'll catch you guys on the next episode. Dan, welcome to Masters of Regeneration Radio.
Thank you so much.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you started, why are you interested in food? And
Yeah, definitely. So my kind of, work in food has gone back since I was a kid. I come from a big Italian family. I think when I say that, people envision this kind of stereotypical Italian-American family, but I would say that some of the folks in my family who cook and who kind of instilled this interest in cooking are definitely not the stereotypical home cooks. They do a pretty substantial amount of cooking at home, and they go through some pretty intense processes that I don't typically think you see in home. So growing up, I was exposed to a lot of pretty cool stuff and delicious food. And I think more importantly, I grew up in a family where although the food was delicious and important, it was pretty amazing to be a part of a group that we were really just taken care of so well through food, and everybody was catered to and everybody felt very comfortable. And I think that's really what kind of spurred me to be interested in cooking, because you could make so many people happy. And I like this idea of kind of being able to, make people happy, but also, for example, like I think everybody out there has members in their family who they would prefer to go to their homes, for example, on a holiday, and there are other people's, that you don't want to go to their home, because not only because do they know how to cook, but they know how to host. I mean, some people really know how to take care of people, and some people just, they just don't understand how to do it. And it might be a mentality, but, so in my family, there's a few people that really knew how to do it and still know how to do it. And something about it was like this amazing experience. And I wanted to be able to provide that experience. So that's kind of why I got into cooking initially. And that's when I was like 13, 14 years old. And, I just started cooking and I enjoyed it. I got a job in a restaurant at a very young age. I enjoyed working in restaurants. I enjoyed the atmosphere. Um, but then when I went to culinary school, it quickly became about really fine dining and as being an ambitious person and motivated person. It kind of it took over this idea of trying to get to the top and trying to work in a well-known restaurant, work with famous chefs, and so on. So
Yeah.
that I don't want to say it took me off course because I would say that all the experiences that I've had in my career have been amazing, and I've been fortunate. But it definitely kind of changed the way I was thinking about food for quite some time, and not only not until recently, I should say, did I kind of regain this awareness as to why I got into cooking in the first place.
Yeah, of course, of course, of course. Well, it's, I guess, the journey that we all have, and we all get our moment of our call to adventure to kind of in the hero journey, if you will, right?
That's
To get back on track or something, or go explore something different altogether, right?
right. Well, that's true. That's exactly right. So, I mean, I think it's funny because when I speak to people all the time, as well, it's amazing you were able to kind of choose your career and stick to it at a young age. But really, again, I think in any career that you choose, there's a lot of ways to do it. And I think not until now have I really figured out the way I want to do it. So it's been a bit of a journey, and it's exciting to think that just now have I really figured it out, and that's really energizing.
So was it a particularly challenging journey anyway? I mean, arriving to Noma, was it, or has it been? I don't know how to put it. Has it been more challenging to just decide to come back to the US and decide that your calling was not working in fine dining, but doing something for a serious problem at home, basically?
Well, I mean, I think, I think a lot of people ask me kind of this idea of like, oh, it must have been tough to make this decision to leave the fine dining world, or for that matter, leave a place like Noma and then get into what I'm doing now. But I think that was the big change for me. Being at Noma and going to Noma was what gave me the confidence to make that decision. I think for me, it was a pretty easy decision in the sense that I feel like in most cases, um, particularly in this kind of work, right? And I guess any type of work in general. But the work that I'm doing now is kind of humbling. Maybe you don't get as much recognition or the type of recognition that you would get, say, in a restaurant or a place like Noma. So it's hard to leave a place where you're getting a lot of recognition and then go to a place where maybe you won't. But I was fortunate enough to be in a place like Noma where I received recognition, and I feel now I don't need that.
Yeah,
Where so it's easy for me to say it that I'm doing the work I'm doing now, and I'm not worried about that anymore. But I think if you haven't, for example, in the chef's world, if you haven't had the opportunity to prove yourself, if you will, then maybe you don't have the confidence to say like, I don't care what people think about what I'm doing now. Like for me, I could care less because I know what I'm capable of. I know what I can accomplish. And quite frankly, not many people really challenge me on it because they know what I was able to do.
for sure.
So
Yeah.
it's easy for me to say it. So I think for some folks, like when I'm talking to people about chefs in particular, about particularly making this switch, maybe going from working in restaurants to working in a school or working in a hospital, it's easy for me to just say, oh yeah, it's just go ahead and do it. But I can also understand how it's not that easy. Again, if you haven't felt that maybe you've kind of proved yourself to a lot of people, and if you feel the need to do that, then maybe that's something you need to do first. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, it would seem to me that they're both a pretty high performance sort of undertaking, right? Because I'm sure, and you can tell us a little bit about that, but I'm sure the pace and the challenges and the demands at Noma were one thing, and then choosing to provide good food with, good nutritional balance to kids in schools in the US is also has its own its whole different beast, but
Right.
must be pretty
That's right.
challenging.
I mean, that's really the thing that I think is kind of the misconception that you would especially with chefs, which is kind of funny, a little naive, but this idea that going from a place like Noma, which is this like super fine dining restaurant that's very intense, and you work all these kind of hours and so on, that in some way would be more challenging than what I'm doing now. But I mean, um, the job that I have now and the work that we do now is way more challenging in a variety of ways. And that, I mean, I think the core of the work that we do and why it's more challenging is that, when you have a restaurant, you do what you want to do. You have a plan and you do it and you execute on that plan. The work that we do now, it's basically like saying we have a plan and this is what we want to execute, but you're doing it within another system that you have no control over. So that makes the work really hard. It makes it very frustrating at times. There are a lot of times where you need to look at what you're doing and say that, well, this is where we want to go, but in order to get there in the current moment, we'll need to compromise, make some concessions in order to get there. And in a place like Noma, you don't make concessions, you don't make compromise. You
Yeah.
just do it. You just do what you want to do, and that's that.
Yeah.
So that's a really challenging thing, and I don't think a lot of people consider that, in the sense that, again, I think as a chef in general, by nature, you're the kind of person that you do what you want to do. You make food that you want to make, and it's about you and what you want to cook.
Yeah.
Uh, this is a very different scenario now.
Could you share a little bit about the process of when you felt the calling to leave Noma and do the work you're doing now, and how you responded to that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think first of all, it comes to a point where you start to have. I don't think at any point for me it was about leaving Noma because I wanted to do something different specifically. I think it was time for me to leave Noma. I've been there as the head chef for over 3 years, and it's a really stressful job, and it takes a lot out of you. And there was a point where it was clear to me that I would have to move on at some point, and it would be best to have someone else take over that job with a new sense of energy and so on. So when it was time to start thinking about what was next, um, I will be honest with you, it never crossed my mind. Like I never had the desire to say open a restaurant. One thing I did know is that, and what Noma really did for me in a lot of ways was inspire me to do something big. I knew that leaving a place like Noma, it made me think in a very certain way that I just thought big. We thought big all the time. It was just, this phrase, go big or go home. It was like you didn't really ever do anything that wasn't trying to be the best.
Yeah.
And so when I knew it was time to move on, it was like, all right, well, what am I going to do that's big? And again, that coupled with this newfound sense of confidence in myself and what I knew I could do, I really, uh, was thinking the sky was the limit. So, I think subconsciously I always um, liked the idea of cooking for lots of people. Throughout my career leading up to Noma, I kind of went back and forth between working in fine dining restaurants and kind of more high volume restaurants that weren't maybe as recognized as places that served amazing food. But I always valued this idea of feeding a lot of people, and that's really where this idea came from. Was
Hmm.
one thing about Noma, which was pretty special, was that we were all these chefs cooking for very few people. We were 45 chefs essentially cooking for 45 people, and obviously that doesn't limit you too much in what you can do. You can pretty much do anything, so it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But for me, it was this idea that I wanted to cook for lots of people, and then working in a restaurant, as great as it can be, in most restaurants, you don't really have the opportunity to see your customers, your guests that often. Outside of you know, the few community restaurants here and there. It's the idea of being able to cook for not only a lot of people, but cook for them often. And that's the exciting thing
Yeah.
about what we're doing, and kind of why I wanted to get into it is like, so how do you cook for lots and lots of people? And how do you cook for them in a way that you have access to them every day? In a lot of cases, that's like cooking for family. Like you get to cook for them every day, and you have a real impact on maybe their life or maybe the way they eat in general. So this was kind of where the thought started, and I started searching for ways to do this, and kind of went through a variety of options and
Mhm.
ideas, and landed on institutional food in general because it kind of checks off all those boxes that you're cooking for lots of people. Not only are you cooking for lots of people, you're cooking for people who generally need better food. So whether they be young people in grade schools, or sick people in hospitals, or elderly people in senior homes. I mean, it's really, or incarcerated people
Gotcha.
in prisons. It's really, these are people who really need better food. So that was a start, and then beyond that, you're feeding them every day, and the fact that the food that they're eating now is not very good is obviously the main reason that we need to get into this. And then I think for me, one major reason for getting into institutional food as well was the idea that I wanted to feed a lot of people. I wanted to feed them often, and one of the ideas that I initially had was like opening some kind of large chain, like a fast food chain of sorts. And I think for me, the reason I ended up saying that that wasn't the way to go was primarily because of the idea that we have so much wasted food already, um, and the idea of like creating a whole bunch of more food seems very irresponsible. So going into institutions that are already producing all of this food every day already and just making it better seemed like the responsible thing to do. Now, that's where we get into this argument again that as a chef, it's difficult to say, okay, I'm going to go into places that are already established,
Hmm.
that already have systems in place, whether they be bad or good. They already have a staff, they're already making certain types of food, and then try to work off of that. It's not as exciting for a lot of people than, as opposed to just starting from scratch and doing exactly what you want to do.
For
And,
sure.
and and the other thing is like not only is it difficult and not as exciting, but for some people, but it's also, we take a lot of flack and a lot of criticism for things that we do that are kind of out of our control at the moment, but that's just what it is. I mean, I think generally most people don't. We have a lot of kids who, and we'll talk more about this, we have a lot of kids who love what we do, but we also have kids who criticize what we do, of course. And those kids who criticize us, I think, generally don't understand why the food is the way it is. There's so many constraints that we're trying to follow. So it's a tough
Yeah.
decision to get into that. For me, I will say genuinely, the prospect before I had even made the decision to do all of this, the prospect of cooking like this and cooking within this system and cooking within these constraints is such a challenge that it was very exciting for me. And it was like it's the more I dug into it, the more I kind of uncovered as far as the challenges go, particularly in school food. I really, really was excited to get into it for sure.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, you come from a very tough school, very stressful, but also you have this intention, which you said, you really want to take care of people, right? You really want to feed people
right.
often,
That's right.
feed them well and often, and so
Yeah.
and in doing so, just making them healthier or something like that. So what are some of those constraints or what are some of those variables that you may have in creating menus for, and by the way, I didn't know you were doing that with hospitals and nursing homes as well. I thought it was only schools.
Well, we are only doing it in schools now. But my definite, my goal for sure is, because I think the constraints which we face are, which I'll go over now, are very similar across the board in institutions. It's a lot of the similar problems that we face. So I think it's very applicable, and I have a great interest in working in those institutions as well because I think they're just as in need as they're in schools. So, um,
Um,
well, yeah. So I mean, I think again, that's obviously, I guess, the kind of the root of the work we do. It's basically based in constraints. I think if we weren't facing the constraints, then what we do would be easy, and a lot of people would be doing it. So,
mhm.
um, the main ones are essentially dictated by the government, which is the National School Lunch Program, which is kind of mandated by the USDA. So as a public school, you can choose to be in this program. You don't have to be, but that's typically where most schools will get their funding to feed their students. So
Gotcha.
basically, the way it works is that if you want to be a part of it, you serve a meal that meets very strict nutritional guidelines, which um, actually last week the Trump administration rolled back some of those guidelines to make it, they're not as strict, and majority of people out there are very much against it. I think mostly in just, I guess, probably in response to just being against a lot of things that the Trump administration is doing. I personally, the sheer idea of rolling back the guidelines, I can understand how people, it just bothers them because you don't know what the motivation to doing that is. But I would argue that the guidelines that are in place right now are very strict and very difficult for schools to adhere to. I am not entirely against some of the things that they have proposed or have actually executed on. Some of them I am, but nonetheless, that's just a side note. So there's these very strict nutritional guidelines. If you produce a meal that fits those guidelines and you prove that you do that through documentation and ultimately the occasional audit, in-person audit performed by the USDA,
Yeah.
you get a certain amount of money back from the government. So that's basically the way it works. And that amount of money is not a ton. Just to put it in perspective, this year lunch, it's about $3.30 some odd cents, depending on where you are in the country. And that is for everything. So that's quite the misconception. That's for food, labor, maintenance, really anything you can associate
Oh,
with the
wow. Okay. Not
right. So
not the price per meal for one kid, just the
right. So
food, but everything.
right. So the food usually boils down to about like $1.25. So
Wow.
main constraints
Okay.
being adhering to these very strict nutritional guidelines, the budget. So again, let's just say $1.25 for the cost of food. Those are kind of the first main ones, and then probably I would say the biggest one is after you've come up with meals that fit those constraints, serving something that kids actually enjoy eating.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the big three. Now, beyond that, there's a myriad of challenges. I mean, you're primarily working with staff who hasn't received much training. A lot of schools out there don't have really well equipped kitchens, if they even have kitchens in the first place. The general idea of spending more money or putting more resources into school food service programs to correct some of these things that I'm talking about, whether it's provide training, whether it's building out kitchens. That's, the idea of putting money into that is pretty, at the bottom of
Mhm.
the heap. Most people want to spend more money on other things. So there's a lot of challenges, but I think in general, the main ones are really um, coming down to creating. I think if we were able to create meals that fit the budget, that fit the guidelines, and that kids loved, like just lots of those, it wouldn't be that hard. But it's really difficult to do that, because if we were able to do that pretty easily, a lot of these other things would fall in line. It's difficult when you're trying to make change, and when the singular kind of metric that is used almost to see if, say, this is successful, this kind of program is successful, is the
Mhm.
participation in the meals. So how many kids are actually eating the meals? When that's really the only thing that's being used to judge if it's working or not, it's difficult, because when you're transitioning to new foods, we
Yeah.
might consider them better foods, but obviously it does take time for the kids to take to them. So if the participation in the meals does not increase, it becomes very difficult to justify making these types of changes. So if we were able to just create lots and lots of meals that the kids loved, then of course participation would increase. Therefore, the support being there. So I think where we're at now is really trying to kind of straddle the line of this idea of being able to offer new meals, be slightly ambitious, steering kids in the right direction regarding eating habits, but offering enough variety and enough kind of safe meals for these kids that um, they're going to continue to try things. Otherwise, you'll lose them, and
Yeah.
the participation doesn't go up. If anything, it might go down. And therefore, the administration of these schools is looking at you like, okay, well, this isn't going very well.
Yeah.
So, and then that obviously jeopardizes your ability to move forward with all of this.
I have so many questions. So one of them is, so you guys, compared to the model that kids had before, you come in and you have more culinary methods and techniques.
Mhm.
You are, and I'm just speculating here. Are but you're using the same ingredients as before, and then you're nutritionally balancing out the plate a little more, or
Uh, yeah, I would say
like, yeah,
that's kind of right. I mean, I would say that our focus isn't so much the nutrition. I know that doesn't sound good, but basically, I'd say that because we're all following the same nutritional guidelines. Now I will say that as these guidelines, have started to roll back and might continue to be rolled back and become less strict. At that point, it might be a little more essential for us as a company. And, we have our own set of values and standards that we would be enforcing things in a more strict way than the nutritional guidelines that are
mhm,
mandated by the federal government. But until now, if we're working within the guidelines that are provided by the federal government, in terms of providing food that the kids are really going to enjoy, that's already very constraining.
okay,
So we kind of leave it at that. I think definitely our focus is making the food delicious. So it's in many cases using a lot of I would say we're adding on a lot of ingredients. I mean, you need to imagine a lot of the schools are typically not sourcing that many fresh fruits and vegetables or fresh protein. So the majority of our recipes are based off of those ingredients. So there is quite a change in the types of ingredients that are being used for the meals.
mhm,
And then obviously the processing of those ingredients, the cooking of those ingredients requires, this culinary element. So that's kind of what we're doing.
okay. So yeah, the other questions I have in mind are, what do those guidelines look like? Second, what's the quality of those ingredients? Where do they come from, and how do schools source them independently, or
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah, no, I think this is a good question. So, as far as the guidelines go, they're pretty all over the place as far as there are daily guidelines, there are guidelines for each meal, there are weekly guidelines. Some of the guidelines are as broad as saying that you need to serve a certain selection and type of vegetables over the course of a week. Some of them are as specific as saying, there are many that set very specific milligram amounts of variety of ingredients,
Hmm.
percentages of saturated fat in any given meal.
Yeah.
Uh, so they're a little all over the place, but they are pretty strict. And I will say also, there's a lot of ways to kind of, I don't want to say game them, like to kind of get around them in a way. And you can kind of see how some of the larger companies that produce these meals, like processed meals to fit these guidelines, kind of they produce meals and you would look at them and say, how are these healthy for you? They just find ways of doing certain things, and we can kind of see how that happens. So I think they're very complicated and very difficult to follow. But I think more importantly, and this is what I don't particularly like about them, they're kind of nutritional guidelines that you could never really follow in your own personal life because they are so complicated. It's not like you can just go home and say, ah, yes, I'm going to eat this meal. So I'm going to have 10% saturated fat, or it's going to have X
Yeah.
milligrams of sodium. They're so specific that it's very difficult to follow. So,
Yeah.
so, so they're kind of all over the place. Regarding the ingredients, um, when we show up to school, and this is a tough one, and I think the sourcing of better ingredients is a challenge, and the reason that is because any money you spend for this program, so again, the money that supports the school food service program, if you're participating in the National School Lunch Program, are funds that come, federally reimbursed from the government. Therefore, you're technically spending government money. So when you go out to find new suppliers for food, there's quite a regulated process for doing that. You can't just go anywhere and buy anything. So it's not just like, well, we can make it work financially, so we can just figure it out. There's a bid process. You need to show that you're basically spending this money fairly.
Yeah.
So you can imagine that becomes, particularly in the very large school districts, extremely complicated. Now, what I will say is we've seen some success early on with the ability to do it. I mean, I will say once you're switching kind of the menus up and all of a sudden you're adding culinary capability to the kitchens, obviously this creates a lot more potential for getting better products, more responsibly produced, or raised. So that's a constant push. I mean, I think what we do is definitely pushing things in the right direction.
Beautiful.
But it is definitely easier said than done to just switch things up in that sense.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, transitioning is going to take a while. I'm sure it's not an overnight process.
Sure, but what I will say on that note,
Yeah.
though, is like anything we're doing, it's a process. But for example, in a New York City public schools, if we're able to legitimately source one new product that's really responsibly sourced or raised or produced, and that product is being used citywide, that's huge. I mean, it's absolutely huge when you're talking about a million meals being served every single day.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
if they're big systems, so if you can really make even small changes in the big systems, the effect is enormous.
And that's what are you working with so many schools? Say, because you've started in New York, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we're in two school districts, one of
Okay.
which is very small in New London, Connecticut, of only 6 schools, and now we're in New York City public schools, and we're only directly working in a small selection of schools in New York City, as far as the putting of the model, I guess, like
Gotcha.
implementation of the model. But we are working with the school food organization, and with working with them, we are really looking to see what changes can be made. More district wide, which is pretty exciting because you can, again, imagine kind of the implications that can have if we're able to make some cool changes.
Very cool. So, can we talk a little bit about different levels of understanding? I'm just thinking about the audience who's listening
Sure.
to this episode, and because we could go, deep down into the rabbit
Yeah.
hole of,
Sure.
you know, regeneratively grown, whatever, and very, very specific things. But what does, or for example, when you say responsible ingredients, what do you mean by that? That's one thing, and then the other.
Sure.
Uh, right now, are there any local or seasonal produce being
Right.
purchased by the schools and things like that? And ultimately, um, what did, say, a plate look like before you came in, and what does it look like now in terms of like the very specific, so that people can really get an idea of what you're proposing?
Sure. So, I mean, I think to your first question, obviously coming from the background I come from, the idea of sourcing local ingredients, seasonal ingredients, um, this is definitely what we want to try and we want to encourage, and that's kind of like at the base of, if you're a chef these days, like you not even a chef, but even if you're just a general consumer at home, you're
Hmm.
definitely looking for local and seasonal ingredients. For us, the sourcing of local and seasonal ingredients is quite challenging. Um, the reason being, first and foremost, cost.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, these days, as much as we want to use local and seasonal ingredients and we want to use farm produce, I mean, our price point is extremely, extremely low. And obviously, small productions of ingredients and smaller farms, even medium sized farms, they don't have the scalability in terms of being able to charge a lot less as like large producers. So when I talk about, responsibly produced and things like this, I mean, I guess it's a pretty broad term, but I guess what I mean is really understanding where your food's coming from
Yeah.
and feeling good about, because these days it's really difficult to look at some of the terminologies that are out there that technically dictate or standards. For example, even organic these days means something very different than it used to mean. So
Yeah.
for me, I like to think that, and when I was working in restaurants, I think the most important thing for me was knowing where the food came from and understanding more specifically that producer as far as how do they operate. Forget about terms and terminologies. It's just more about this is how they operate. This is how they're doing things. These are their goals. These are the people in charge. So obviously, first and foremost, when you're not a small restaurant, you're a giant organization that's trying to feed lots of people. It's very difficult to have relationships with small producers. Obviously, the smaller the producer, it's a lot easier to understand where they're coming from, what their goals are, and so on.
Yeah.
So when you're working with large companies, it becomes a little more difficult. But there are a lot of large companies and producers, farms, etc., that are really trying to do the right thing. So when I mean responsible, again, it's just trying to really understand and feel good about the variety of ingredients. And I will say that that's really challenging. Again, obviously, the lower the price point, um, the less likely you're to run into high quality. Typically, people that are doing the right thing, it does cost more money to do the right thing. Therefore, their product costs more. So
Yeah.
it does become challenging, but they're out there. There are companies, and there are a lot of companies out there that seemingly have very, very healthy businesses and like the idea of helping to subsidize costs of some of their products to, say, a school, to encourage that kind of thing. So, there are opportunities out there, but in the end, it is very challenging. And I will say it's not that hard to say supplement what you're doing with local and seasonal products. And I think there are a lot of school districts out there that do that, that are, certain times of the year, they're able to kind of bring in small quantities of products from local farms and use them. But the
Yeah.
idea of really sourcing the bulk majority of your food that you're providing with local and seasonal products is extremely difficult. The other thing being that, in an area like the East Coast, the most vibrant growing season is when school's not in session.
Yeah.
So, to think that you are just going to use local and seasonal products, say from late October until the end of March, beginning of April, in most of the East, Northeast, very
Yeah.
difficult, very
Yeah.
limited in what you have. So there are a lot of challenges to it, but I think that's something we need to continue to work on. And the other thing is, if, say, you're a farmer and you produce raw products, you grow fruits and vegetables. Most school kitchens out there currently are not even capable or not even set up to, say, take a whole head of lettuce and process that. And I know that sounds silly, but they might not have the appropriate storage space for a whole head of lettuce. They might not have the appropriate sinks to wash that lettuce.
Hmm.
They might not have enough staff or enough trained staff to cut that lettuce. A lot of these, the alternative would be to get a bag of already cut lettuce. And
Yeah.
as simple as that sounds, if you're not set up to do something, you're not set up to do something. So again, moving in this direction now, where more school kitchens have the capability in their design of the kitchen, their equipment, the training of the staff, the leadership of the staff. Now, all of a sudden, this is opening up a lot of possibilities for a lot of food purveyors. And they're saying, oh, wow, this is, I think a lot of them have good hearts and they want to do the right thing. But also, and this is important to change happening, of course, is that it's a great business.
Yeah.
The idea of being able to sell to schools that have consistent and large populations. This is obviously a much better business than, say, selling to a restaurant that could be busy on a Saturday but dead slow on a Wednesday. So
For sure. Yeah.
I think we're seeing a lot of food purveyors, whether they be farmers or larger producers of a variety of foods, coming and saying, "Oh, wow, you have chefs in kitchens. Maybe we can sell you our products." So I think that's definitely going in the right direction. And what that results in, and to your last question, is this idea of you're going to end up going from, a meal that we used to see would be something that was primarily assembled, produced foods, meaning on a tray you might have um, some kind of cheeseburger or sandwich that is pre-prepared and possibly even inside of a bag, like completely packaged,
Oh,
uh,
wow. Okay.
that's been heated up.
Like airplane food or something like that.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So it doesn't
Oh,
really have to be handled so much.
yeah.
Uh, that might be served with some kind of vegetable that was probably processed prior to it arriving to the school kitchen. So whether it was like a frozen cut item that then is just kind of heated in the oven, and that would actually not even be that bad. I think a lot of schools might not even have that, but again, some kind of pre-processed sandwich in a bag, maybe some heated processed vegetable that came in, and then a milk and maybe a whole fruit. And typically, and this is something that really frustrates me, you'll see things like whole fruit um, that is like, it might be apple season in the East Coast, and we're serving apples from 8 months before that came from somewhere across the world,
Yeah.
and that's the nature of things that you see sometimes. So
Yeah.
to now we have a meal that is, let's compare, apples to apples. We do a lot of really cool meals, but if we were to do a sandwich, for example, like one sandwich we do is like roasted beef brisket, where we bring in beef brisket. The beef brisket has been marinated, dry rubbed the day before and cooked slowly. It then gets sliced, served on a roll with some kind of cabbage slaw. We might serve it with, roasted potato wedges. We bring in potatoes, we cut them into spears, we
Yeah.
season them, roast them so they're nice and crispy, and then serve it with cut fruit. So that's one big thing that we've done, was the idea of serving things with prepared fruit rather than just whole fruit. So that's a big difference. And obviously, that's nice. It encourages kids to eat more fruit. They enjoy it. It's easier to eat, and so on. So it's
Yeah.
nice.
That is so awesome. I mean, it sounds like it's pretty titanic undertaking. I mean, it sounds kind of like you're doing like the school food system rehab or something, like where you have someone who's
It's
who's
big.
sort of gone out of whack in their habits, and you have to like retrain them. Listen, this is how you do things to be healthy.
Well, it is, and the thing is, again, when I first started doing this, I was very quick to criticize a lot of it from top to bottom.
Yeah, I
But when
bet.
you get into it, you kind of see. I'm not making excuses for people who have allowed it to get to this, but you kind of see how it got to this. It's a combination of a lot of things. A combination of very very tight budgets in schools.
Hmm.
It's a combination of just general lack of prominence put on food in general.
Hmm.
So it just kind of always gets pushed to the back, and money gets spent elsewhere. And there's just a lot of things that go into it, and you can understand why it's gotten to where it is. And the nice thing about that is that a lot of the things to make it better, a lot of the ways that we can find to make it better aren't that complicated. You know what I mean? They're not that difficult. You
Yeah.
just got to do them. A lot of the things are pretty like rudimentary things that will kind of get us going in the right direction, and I think that's really what we're focused on. I think when we first started, maybe we overcomplicated things a little bit much, and I think we're realizing that you really just need to start with the basics. You can't overlook just the very basic things that we all do. And when I say we, the people who work in the like for example, the restaurant industry, like they're just very simple things of how to run a kitchen and how to do very basic stuff. I mean, this is just these things are absent right now in a lot of schools.
Yeah. such as
I mean, just as simple as like looking at how to organize a kitchen
mhm.
or basic training. I mean, the majority of staffs in these schools have not been trained to do really anything. And
Yeah.
when I mean anything, I mean like nothing. It's just a matter
Mm.
of they really are just assembling things. These are people that unfortunately haven't been really shown to prepare anything. It's more just, again, taking food from this package and putting it here. Don't get me wrong, there are obviously quite a few people out there who have been trained, but the majority of them have not. And
Yeah.
it makes it very difficult to really to do anything of quality if the staff has not been really paid attention to and given the proper level of training. Um, but again, even from even before the program really is even in place, I mean, we meet, we've met relatively often with schools that are in the process of designing new schools, and obviously a lot of schools are being built every year, and you see the spaces that they're putting in these schools that are designated for the cafeteria and the kitchen, and it's like no consideration has been put into it as to what they're going to do with the food.
Yeah.
And that's where it starts. And it's just basic stuff. We're not even talking like at that stage, you're not even talking about spending more money. You know what I mean? You're
Yeah.
just about being more resourceful and clever as to how things are organized. So, are there a lot of things that do require money? Yes, there are. But are there a lot of things that you can do that just require a little bit of kind of more thought and they don't
Yeah.
require money? There are many of those things as well.
It yeah, what you're saying makes me think a lot about this awesome TED Talk I saw years ago by Hans Rosling. Do you know Hans Rosling?
It's not
He passed away a couple years ago, I think, or a year ago. He was like a global health expert, and he
okay.
gave these super fun presentations on global statistics, but he had invented with his son a way to present global health statistics in bubbles, so it was like visually very entertaining.
Hmm.
It was really cool. Just I'll send you a link so you can check it
Yeah.
out, and I'll put it on the episode because it's pretty awesome. But he gave a talk that where he kind of put money, culture, and other kind of variables in two columns, and one column was these variables as means to achieve something, and
Okay.
those same variables as goals.
Got it.
And he was like, as means, money is everything because it allows you to make things, make shit
Sure.
happen. But as a
Right.
goal, it ends up having no value as a goal, right? And so it seems to me that the lines can get blurry when your goal is to be efficient and save as much money as possible, so you can transport this dehydrated foods or packaged foods so that you can save time and things like that, and you
Sure.
lose kind of like sight of the original goal, which is yes, you have to make money to keep your business going, and at the same time you need to provide some good food for the kids that the like the vast majority of kids that go to public schools.
Right. I mean, I
Yeah.
think I think at some point I mean, I'll be very honest with you. I mean, when you talk to a lot of people, even now, in this
Mhm.
day and age, where I feel like you hear about it at least that food is more important and people are more focused on things. But when you have these conversations with folks that are running these programs and institutions, or even just the leadership within these institutions, it, it's like that goal isn't there anymore. The goal is not to provide good food. The goal is just to provide food that's provided in a timely manner, that's maybe provided safely, it's provided in a clean setting. It's not so much like quality based. It's just these bare minimum factors. As long as it's
Okay.
safe, it's
Yeah.
provided timely. It's if it's supposed to be hot, it's served hot. If it's supposed to be served cold, it's served cold. I mean, I really mean that. Like when you
Oh
have these
my God.
conversations,
Yeah.
it's pretty clear that that's if that's happening, then the likelihood that you're receiving like really atrocious kind of feedback is slim. because as long as those things are happening, you might receive some bad feedback here and there, but it just becomes something that doesn't demand all your attention. Now, usually the reason that leadership in these schools, from when I, in most cases, I mean, obviously you have forward thinking leaders out there who are trying to just make things the best they can for their students. But it seems like a lot of the people that we've spoken to, superintendents, usually are trying to find a solution only because they've received so much negative feedback from parents and students.
Gotcha.
At that point, they are trying to make a change. It's not just like, well, our food's not really that good. I go down there a lot. I'm not really happy with it. We need to find a solution and make this better. It's more just like, okay, we've dealt with this long enough. We're getting lots of complaints. We have to make a change.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of disappointing, and that's how it's usually
Yeah.
seems like it goes.
So each school has independent say on what they can serve and what they want to serve in a way.
No, typically I mean, obviously there's a lot of variety as far as how schools operate and run, but majority of schools, they're in a school district, and that school district has a food service program, and that food service program um, typically organize, what's being served district wide. You would typically see a menu that's pretty much district wide. There might be some variations depending on grades or capability of the kitchen. For example, in some larger school districts, you have schools that are, have kitchens that are fully equipped and some that aren't. So the meals that are being served are slightly different. But generally, the food within a school district is similar, and it's actually another thing. And this is, of course, a big problem with school food is that um, there are a lot of school districts out there that don't even really have leadership per se in each school anyway, in like each school kitchen. Like in our schools, we're putting a chef in each school, so like it's actually feasible that they could just kind of say we're serving this today versus that. I mean, we don't do that either because we try to keep, within a school district, you want to keep things consistent. But in most schools, you don't even have that kind of leadership anyway to really be able to make these kind of decisions on a daily basis. It's
Mhm.
not really usually run that way.
Mhm. Going back to what you were saying about how they perceive food, I guess I don't know. I don't know if that's what you're going to end up doing at some point, but like, how do people perceive food? Like, what is food? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I
It's
mean, I think for a lot of the people, it's funny because when you come from a world, both professionally, but even personally, where you're surrounded by people where food is really important and you really enjoy food and you're excited to eat things and cook things. And, food is a lot more than just something you put in your body to get through the day.
yeah,
Um, but I think, unfortunately, and I think a lot of this comes from, maybe, well, I don't know. I think it comes from a lot of places. I think if you haven't had the opportunity to grow up in an environment where food is an important part of your culture, then you don't have that.
yeah,
I think if you've grown up in an environment where you didn't have the means to really, enjoy food, or you didn't have the opportunity to have someone cook for you because maybe they didn't have the time because they had two jobs and they didn't really have the ability to cook a meal for you. There's a lot of reasons why people grow up without food being that important to them. Um, and it's unfortunate.
yeah, for
So I
sure.
think, there's a lot of people out there who've had the means, and, I know plenty of people that had all the opportunity in the world, and food is not necessarily that important to them. They eat to get through the day, and they're technically, they're generally not very excited about food or anything like that. But I think a lot of the students that we feed in our schools generally maybe never had the opportunity to learn much about food. They never got exposed to a variety of foods and so on. So I think for them, it's just food. It's just something you put in your body to get through the day. It's nourishment and nothing more.
Yeah, yeah, but it could be like nourishment could be, or nourishment, or just like calories could be what you get served on a plane, which is, not very tasty food, most likely very unhealthy.
Well, that's what I
And
mean.
then compared to some of your plates that I've seen on Instagram, or some of the things you guys make look pretty delicious. I mean, what, a sweet potato risotto with braised short ribs or something like that.
Well,
Sounds
I mean,
delicious for a school lunch.
we're
Um,
definitely trying
yeah,
to. I mean, what I'm saying is that's what I think food is for most people. I
yeah,
mean, for a lot of people, and I think, I think there's obviously food for me is a very different thing, and we want food
yeah,
to be something else for the students we feed, not because we think it should be that, but we want it to be. We want it to be a bright spot in their day. We want it to be something. I mean, food can be a variety of things, and I think first and foremost, that's why food is such an interesting thing because there's a lot of people out there that look at, there's people, and I was part of that world for a little bit where you can look at food as artwork almost,
yeah, yeah,
as inspires you, as something that's innovative and so on. And then the other level of, the other side of that is that food is something you need. You need to eat food to survive. And it's very unfortunate, but when we are coming up with kind of our plan and the meals that we serve, that has to be kind of at the forefront of our decisions because it is actually the fact of the matter that when we're producing meals in schools for kids, that there are a lot of kids that are absolutely dependent on these meals as food to allow them to survive.
yeah,
You know what I mean? And that's the sad fact that we're in that situation. This is the country that there's that many kids that they absolutely depend on these meals. So, you know, I think you have to take into consideration a variety of things when
mm,
you're developing these meals. And as much as we want to push kids to try new things, and we want to expose them to new flavors and new ingredients, and we want to open their eyes to different experiences and really think this through, and we want them to think about what does it mean to have local foods and seasonal foods and so on. At the very base level, though, we need to feed them, and it's a tough line to kind of to be on because you're trying to push them, but you need them to be comfortable, and you need them to eat.
yeah,
And if you let, it's a funny thing because, and this is such at the core of the work we do, where in this argument that I was talking about before, this idea of serving nutritious food, where it's the same thing almost, where, yeah, of course we want to serve nutritious food. Of course we want to serve the best food that's the best for these kids in
hmm,
every way possible. But we can't just stand out there and just say, oh well, we need to serve nutritious food. This is ridiculous. We can't serve food with this, and we can't serve food with this ingredient. But if the kids are not eating, then
yeah,
you have a big problem.
yeah,
And for all these people out there to say, well, the food needs to be more nutritious, we need to use less sodium in the school lunches and all, it's like we are already at a point with the nutritional guidelines in schools. If you spend a lot of time in school cafeterias, you see a lot of kids just throwing the food away. I mean, it's crazy. It's
wow, yeah,
because there's a lot of things that you cannot do that they're used to having. Now, I'm not saying that you should just give kids whatever they want in order to
yeah,
allow them to, okay, we're going to eat. But if you're on the complete other side of that, then you end up doing what a lot of schools do is just serving them food that nobody eats. And what's worse? So again, it's really trying to toe this line, just trying to be somewhere where you know and recognize what you need to do and what you should be doing, but you also know and recognize that if you do just that, you're not going to get anywhere.
yeah,
It's the easy thing to do to just say, this is our plan, let's just do it today.
hmm,
And just turn a blind eye to the fact that no kids are eating and half the food's going in the garbage, but just kind of cheering yourself on and saying, oh, we're doing the right thing, we're serving great healthy food to kids. That doesn't work. So you got to just drop that and say, okay, what are kids thinking about food? What do kids need? What do kids want? And how do we take that and bring them to where we are and how we think and what we think is best.
Yeah.
It's a process, and you have to start somewhere. And I think we have found out that that starting point is not necessarily where you really want to be. You know what I mean? I
Of
think,
course. Yeah.
and that starting point, and probably several years after that starting point, is probably also not where you want to be. It's a difficult way to work in the sense that I always, kind of put this example of like, on a scale of 1 to 10, we started at 1, we probably got to 3 or 4 really quickly, but we'll probably be at like between 4 and 6 for like 5 years,
Yeah.
and that's a really hard place to be and show up every day and work really hard and be motivated in that. But that's the nature of this kind of work. And I think, again, back to the main question is food is a very different thing for everyone, and it
Mm.
means something very different for everyone. And I think in our world where you're catering to just a variety of people who really don't have a choice in the matter, as to saying, well, if food means something to you, you go eat at McDonald's. If food means something else to you, you eat at some other healthy place. If
Yeah.
food means something else to you, you eat at home. If food means something else, you just spend $200 on a meal.
Yeah.
But these people just have to come to our cafeteria, and we have to cater to them. So food is very different for everyone.
Mm.
And I would never tell anyone that food should be this for you and food should be this for you. I think people need to make their own decision on that. I think the best thing we can do is to be confident about what we know and try to give kids the best food in our minds that we can give them, and try to cater to as many people and as many groups and as many tastes as possible, in the process. And I think that's really what we try to do.
That sounds awesome. I mean, it sounds like I mean, I know you're meeting them where they're at right now, and you're really shooting for the long run, and while at the same time sort of shooting for a meal that's rich and delicious or hearty and just like to get them emotionally somehow, right?
Right. And you
Yeah.
know what the thing is? Like, you say that, and it's funny because, like, that could mean serving them a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Yeah,
You know what I
totally.
mean?
Yeah,
And that's the challenge of what we do, because
yeah,
it's like, for some people, that could be the best thing we could serve them. And, like, originally, when I thought of that, I'm like, that sucks. The thing is,
yeah,
it doesn't suck. Everybody's going to have a different pace. Like, if we're feeding a 6-year-old kid, and
yeah,
if it means to get that kid on board to a transition, to feed him peanut butter and jelly sandwich for 2 years straight, and that makes him comfortable, and then by the time he's 8 or 9, he starts to open his mind up to different foods, then it's a huge success, right? But in the meantime, we're like, man, this kid's eating peanut butter and jelly every day or often, and this
yeah,
sucks. But
yeah,
maybe it doesn't suck, because maybe that's the pathway to getting him at a young age, as it is, before he's even 10 years old, to be like, oh no, I'm going to try these new foods now because I feel comfortable here. There's a variety of pathways to
mm,
get people, and you meet people all the time who are grown adults who are picky eaters and don't try things.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So if we can get kids before they graduate high school, you know which is a long time. So, we get so upset. I know when we have kids who are like, again, 5, 6 years old, who won't try things. We're like,
Yeah,
we have time.
yeah,
If we can get them to really be open-minded about food and trying new things before they're 18 years old, I think that's a huge success.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's so important and it's a heroic act and I say it again. I mean, today to think in terms of transitions and transitions that take place over a long period of time is really
Right.
important. It's what the world needs, but it takes so much patience and so much grit.
Right.
Um,
Well, the thing is, it takes patience and it takes grit, but you need to be like relentless, in the
yeah,
sense that I feel like in a lot of these kinds of transitions, and I'm saying this from experience because I could see what happens, because the processes take so long, people become complacent during the process.
Oh
And
yeah,
there's
for sure. Yeah.
you gotta just like back off. It becomes this like
You
it's
forget.
what you do, and it's like this idea that like this is gonna take a really long time, but you need to show up every day and be aggressive to try to push it as hard as you can,
Yeah.
and it's still gonna take a long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, versus this idea that at like some point you lose that edge. And I say it again from experience because I'm right. We're 3 years into it, and you can see that the road is long, but you have to stay like hungry for it.
Yeah. I mean, what you're saying just works for everyone, you know.
Right? Yeah, exactly. It has
Any
nothing to do.
entrepreneur, it's kind
Right.
of like you better remind yourself every day where you're going and what your purpose is. Otherwise, you just forget.
It's hard because I think for me sometimes it's constant reevaluation of what you're
Hmm.
doing constantly, and it's like sometimes you because of it you almost feel like you're unorganized or you're going crazy, but you have to continue to reevaluate what you're doing and where you're at because
Yeah.
if you don't do that, like I understand the idea of like staying the course and you got to hold on to things, but like at some point there's many times where you're like nope, like, and it sucks because I couldn't tell you how many times, and we've and, I think it helps along the way if you're very humble
Yeah.
and you recognize that you're constantly making mistakes. It's very easy to pivot and change, and that's what you need to do. I think if you're so confident all the time in what you're doing, and then all of a sudden you realize that maybe parts of what you're doing or everything is not exactly how you should be doing it, it makes it very difficult to pivot and change.
Yeah.
So for us, I think we've been pretty good at staying humble and saying, we make a lot of mistakes. So when we realize that like we need to change up our thought process, it's not that hard. You just do it. You just do it and you go ahead with it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so important. That's so important again for entrepreneurs out there. Um, just you have to fail fast and you have to understand and you have to try and you have to change it like you were saying. It's
Right. You
so
got to
vital.
try. And like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, there's the other end of it. I think it's
Yeah.
this idea of, being aggressive, being ambitious, is good, and being able to learn quickly and adapt and change and being confident in those changes and
Hmm.
not being worried about changing versus being overly cautious, and not taking risks, not changing anything, not trying. I think that's problematic as well.
Yeah. Especially today when I feel like there's an overall theme of change right now happening so fast around the world, and they're looting and burning shit in Paris, and
Right.
there's Trump, and then
It's crazy.
Brazil, and but it seems like all these old models of reality, all these old systems are kind of like crumbling and falling apart. But it's a dramatic transition, right?
Well, you know what I will say though
Yeah.
too, and I think you're right, and I think there's a lot of things wrong, and there's always going to be a lot of things wrong. It's not like we're gonna
Oh
wake
yeah.
up one day and
Yeah.
everything's gonna be right. And I think people forget that.
Yeah.
I think people, especially in times like now, where we can argue now that there's more going on that's wrong now than ever, and like who's to say that's actually the case? There's just always going to be people and leaders and systems in place that people don't agree with, and I think the easy thing to do is to disagree with it. I think
Hmm.
that's the easy thing, and that's fine. I disagree with a lot of things that are happening right now in the world, but I think what we need more of is people with solutions. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
there's just too much. To me, it bothers me tremendously. There's a lot of people out there criticizing a lot of things. And, as much as like I said, I disagree with a lot of things, I will not be the one that goes out there and wants to criticize lots of things unless I feel like either I understand the solution or there is someone else who has a solution and I can support that person. There's a lot of problems, and some of those problems maybe sound easy to solve, but I don't think they are. And in our little microcosm of school food, we're finding that out that it's easy to criticize such a large system. And I talk to people all the time parents who are like, "What up? My school food is terrible. My kid's school food is terrible, and blah blah blah, and all this." And I'm like, what are your suggestions?" And I
Yeah.
say, "Well, first of all, do you understand how the school food works in your district? Who is in charge? Is it a company? Is it this?" And they're like, "No."
Hmm.
So you don't understand anything. You don't understand how it works. You don't understand the National School Lunch Program. To me, that's very bothersome. It's very bothersome to me that people are very critical of things that they don't understand. And I'm not saying I'm perfect. I've of course done it, but I think since starting to do this work, I'm a little more apprehensive. One thing is to not agree with something, and that's fine. But when you become very critical of it,
Yeah.
I would like to think
You
that you
better propose a solution. Yeah.
well, you better propose a solution. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Or again, in the cases maybe politics, know that there is someone out there who maybe has the solution or will be the solution. And again, I think our politics here are a great example of that because it's always funny. Like people think like, oh, for example, if we have a new president, that like everything's going to change, and it's like, well, the government's not really set up that way. Like certain things will change, and yeah, we might be seeing some atrocities at the moment here. But besides that, I just remember, I always remember like, I remember when like Obama was elected, it was like the world was going to change the next day.
Yeah.
It's like you can argue, okay,
Well, yeah.
maybe he's an amazing president, but there's a lot of things that need to happen, and it's hard to make these kinds of changes, and so I just think that if it's so important at a time like now where all this stuff's happening.
Yeah.
There's thinkers. People are thinking instead of just saying and acting. And it's like, come up with a solution. What's the solution?
Yeah, well, it's the savior complex. Or I don't know if you call it complex, but people hoping that someone is going to do something about all this stuff
Well, that's what I
that isn't
mean.
working, right?
It's crazy. Well, it's crazy too because
Yeah.
some of these people who are like the politicians who like the real deal politicians who are really trying to stand up for things. I feel like they're on their own.
Yeah.
All these people like the bare minimum you can do is like go out and vote. Like great, go and vote. Like you
Yeah.
should do, but like do something else. And it doesn't need to be something
Yeah.
miraculous. Like
Yeah.
like in New London, Connecticut, for example, I realized when I first started living there that recycling is not even something that really happens everywhere.
Yeah.
I'm like, really? Like like just get that going. Like be an
Yeah.
advocate of that in your own town. But it's like we
Yeah.
we elect these officials to like go and change the world, and like in the end of the day, no one's going out there to like help them.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's due to ignorance, and by ignorance I mean just a lack of knowledge, not that people are stupid or anything like that at all. Just, there's a lot of education that needs to happen,
Yeah.
and a sense of community, of people understanding that we are living systems and that recycling needs to happen, like you say, because things need to, get broken down into something else, or used or reused or something.
Right.
Um, and what you were saying about the parents, maybe that's an opportunity. I don't know if you'll do that or that's diluting your mission or something, but creating questionnaires for the parents, just like what is it that you know about your kids' food, or
And
things like that. Just
we've done it recently in
yeah.
some of the schools that we're in to actually the schools we're in to ask them, like, for example, looking at some of the schools where maybe there's a good amount of kids that are bringing their lunch to school. So we're just kind of like asking them, why do you send your kid to school with lunch?
Hmm.
What can we do to kind of promote the idea of them eating school lunch that we prepare? And it's a lack of knowledge. It's like a lot of the parents don't even know that we're there, and it's not even their fault necessarily. It's like parents don't even know we're there. Parents don't even know that we're providing these meals. Um, it's lack of communication. But I think but again, if you're going to be critical of things, I think you need to be proactive to find out the information yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why I'm so grateful to have this conversation with you and people, the other people on the podcast, because you're one of many people actually saying, all right, the world's fucked up. but I can do something about it, and I'm going to go out of my way to just create a new reality, even if it takes a long time and I have to, be very patient and relentless, like you were saying.
Yeah, I mean,
But you're
the way
willing to put in the effort, right?
well, that's right. And like the way I see it is like to make real change, like it's not going to happen if just like a few people do things. So, a lot of stuff's going to fail. Who knows? We might fail, and it's like in order for things to ever get better, you got to put the odds in our favor. You need a lot of people trying a lot of good things, and some things will work, and some things won't work. But if there's a lot of people trying it, then inevitably some things are going to work, and they're going to move things forward. So I figure, like for me, and it was always funny because when I first started doing this, there were a lot, and I still get criticism. A lot of people criticize me within this space. They're like, "Oh, you're a chef from the outside. What do you know about school food?" And it's like I never claimed to know anything particularly special. I know how to cook. I know how to run kitchens. I'm organized. And I'll continue to learn about school food, but that's not the point. The point was that I'm gonna give it a shot. I'm gonna try my best, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But I'm going to try as hard as I can. And that's just one more person trying to do something positive. And then obviously, the more people that are doing that, the better off we are.
Yeah, for sure. What are some of the questions you're asking yourself right now, looking at the future and
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, it's always a lot of like, are we doing the right thing? And
Mhm.
and and that comes down to usually basically this idea of if we put things again in terms of like a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the
Yeah.
most ambitious thing that we could be trying right now, but also inherently the least scalable,
Hmm.
1 being the least ambitious thing we can do and the most scalable, and like what's the best decision you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
I think when we started at 10, and I think we all agree, the people on my team, that at some point it's not even worth doing it. The lower you go as far as ambition, like why even do this? But it needs to be more scalable.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing we're always
So
asking.
humbling.
Yeah, I think it's the thing we are always asking ourselves is like, where is that point that we settle on? Because even the point that we think is a lot more scalable than where we started is going to be a lot more, very demanding and a lot to ask, and still considered extremely ambitious and out of many people's comfort zone in terms of school districts' willingness to do it. So, um, but again, the whole point of this is to make impact and to move things forward. So, it's just that fine line again of ambition versus
Yeah.
scalability, and that's a big question that I would say that's the biggest question that we continuously are reevaluating, and a lot of it has to do with ego. I think we continuously talk about how to do this kind of work you have to drop your ego, and I feel like we have, but then there are moments where I feel like we haven't, that we still feel like there are things that we shouldn't do or should do, and it's all ego driven.
Yeah.
I think if we really, really just looked at the kids and understood really what they want to eat, and really measure out what that means, decisions would be clear. But sometimes we let our ego get in our way and like, oh, I don't think we should do this because maybe that doesn't sound good enough or whatever it may be. And it's like, well, is that the right process? So I think that's another question. I think that's one thing we're actually doing at the moment, as we today and this past couple of weeks. And some of it has to do in response to these nutritional guidelines getting rolled back, is this idea of really defining how we make decisions regarding the food.
Yeah.
So just even more specific, not just the model in general of how we work with schools, but just the food. How do we decide what we should be feeding kids and why? What are our reasoning behind it? And we've been very deliberate in everything we've done, but I think it's really time now that and maybe overdue, that we really, really define it. How do we make decisions regarding the food? And so it's not ego driven. It's not like, oh, I don't know, if, maybe we shouldn't do that. It's like, no, well, that's this. These are our values, and these are why, and it's a reminder of why we do things.
Yeah. That's awesome. Anything else you'd like to add, Dan, that I haven't asked you about?
Um, I mean, I think we went over a lot. I think, um, again, I just think I would just love to reiterate this idea of how food is just different for everyone, and I think it's so important to understand that. And the people that are most vocal about these issues are the people that food is a very particular type of thing to them. Food is very important. Locality and seasonality of food is very important to them, but that's not the case for everyone. And the people who don't think about food in that way, it's they're it's okay that they think that way. It's not their fault. You can't look at them negatively because they don't value food. I think
Yeah.
it's really important to try to figure out how to get to maybe find ways to show other people around you the importance of food and the value of food, and the value of nutrition and the value of sustainable products and the value of local and seasonal products. But there's too much of this, like, and I hate it, this vibe that you look down at people when they don't value food.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the common way to do it, and it doesn't make sense. That doesn't help. That doesn't help anyone. Like,
I
the end,
totally agree. Yeah.
food is such a special thing. Again, that anyone anyone out there will believe in these ideas if you can show it to them, if you can put it in front of them, and people be like, "Wow, this apple that is local to here is so good. It's amazing."
Yeah.
You might not be able to explain it to them in words to get them to believe in it. They might, in some cases, might not be willing or able to afford it in some
Yeah.
cases.
Mm.
But in the right circumstance, maybe you can get them to appreciate it. You might be able to say, like, look, a lot of people, like, I look at my family, a lot of members in my family, as much as they appreciate food and have the means to, say, go out and buy a particular type of produce,
Hmm.
will probably go out and buy a cheaper thing just because it's cheaper.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And if I try to explain to them in words, I might never get to them. But if I can get them to experience something, they might say,
Yeah.
"Wow, this is
Yeah.
worth it. I get it now." But we don't always have these opportunities.
Mm.
And those are the things that, the more of those opportunities that exist and the more of those opportunities that we can create, people will change their thinking. But it's not going to come out of being negative and looking down upon people because of the way they do or do not value certain things.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. But yeah, experience can't be unexperienced, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Well, it's good. It's good that you're aiming for stories and emotion and experience rather than lecturing or judging and all that stuff.
Yes.
Well, good luck, Dan, with all the work. Where can people check your work and follow you?
Yeah. So we have a website. The name of the company is Brigade, but the website, because of the unavailability of
Okay.
brigade.com, is chefsbrigade.com. So
Okay.
chefsbrigaid.com. And I have an Instagram account that's dan.giusti. That's Giusti. And we have an
Cool.
Instagram account that's also Brigade. And I feel like Instagram is where we do post a lot about what we're doing, the challenges that we face, the successes that we have, and so on. So it's definitely worth following if you're interested in this type of thing.
Very cool. Dan, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Thomas. I appreciate it.
Yeah, be in touch, please.
I will. Thanks
All
a
right.
lot.
Take care, Dan. Thanks.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye. Hey everyone, thanks again for listening to episode 16 of Masters of Regeneration Radio. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you if you have purchased a t-shirt or one of our limited edition prints. Here are some ideas for you to support this project. Number one, you could go to iTunes right now on your laptop or Apple Podcasts if you're listening to the podcast on your phone, and leave us 5 stars. Give us 5 stars and leave a review if you can. And pick 5, 10 people in your circles who you know care about the planet, who you know care about education, about nature and science, and a better life for everyone. I appreciate all the support that you have given us. You know who you are. And please sign up for our mailing list. Go to mastersofregeneration.com. That also gives you 10% off on your first purchase if you wish to purchase anything. Otherwise, simply sharing the podcast on social media will be amazing. Thanks again, and I'll see you guys on the next episode.